Hey guys, it's late, the world is quiet, and you're exactly where you need to be. Dim the lights if they're still on. Let the phone screen go all the way down and just breathe out. Tonight we're not here to get excited. We're here to let a very long, very soft, very German scandal from the 1470s slowly wash over us like warm fog. The story is about a nun named Katharina von Bora, yes, the same. Katharina, who 50 years later would marry Martin Luther and become the most famous ex-nun in history. But long before she was serving Luther breakfast, she was apparently serving something else entirely to half the priests in Saxony. And we're going to take this story so slowly that I'll probably be asleep before we even reach the tunnel behind the altar. That's the plan. No jumps, no drama, just the gentle, inevitable slide into total medieval chaos inside a place that was supposed to be silent and pure. So let us start where everything always starts in these stories. With a girl who never really wanted to be there in the first place. Germany 1472, the Holy Roman Empire is a patchwork of little duchies and prince-bishoprics, and everyone is Catholic because there isn't another option yet. Katharina is born into minor nobility, the kind of family that has a crest but not quite enough money to keep all their daughters at court. She's the fifth child, fourth daughter, which in noble terms means financial burden. Her parents love her, of course they do, but love doesn't pay dowries. So at the age of 5, she is promised to the church. Not because she heard angels singing, not because she had a vision of the Virgin Mary, but because the convent of Nun Ran near Grimma has lower entrance fees than a proper marriage, and the family can still say they placed her well. She actually enters the convent at 9 or 10. Imagine that. A child. The walls are thick stone, the windows tiny, the air always smells of candle smoke and damp wool. The rule is Cistercian, which means silence. Prayer 7 times a day, coarse habits that itch, bread that is mostly sawdust, and absolutely no man allowed past the outer gate. Ever. The nuns sleep in dormitories on straw mattresses, rise at 2 a.m. for matins, and are supposed to spend the rest of their lives contemplating the sweetness of Christ's wounds. Katharina is clever, dangerously clever. She learns Latin faster than the older sisters. Copies manuscripts with a hand so neat the abbess uses her work as gifts for visiting bishops. She has wide gray eyes and thick auburn hair that she has to keep hidden under a veil. But even the veil can't hide that she is beautiful in the way that makes people nervous. Beautiful people in convents are always a problem. They remind everyone of the world outside. By the time she's 16, she's already bored out of her skull. The prayers feel like chewing the same stale bread every day. The older nuns gossip in whispers about which priest has the nicest singing voice at Mass, and Katharina listens. She listens very carefully, because she is starting to notice something nobody ever says out loud. The priests who come to say Mass, hear confessions, or bless the harvest are not exactly radiating monastic purity themselves. Some of them smell of wine before noon. Some of them linger too long when they give the kiss of peace. One of them, a plump canon from Leipzig with soft hands, actually cries in the confessional booth because he misses women so much he can't sleep. And Katharina, being Katharina, doesn't clutch her rosary in horror. She thinks, supply and demand. Because here is the thing nobody wanted to admit in 1470s. Germany, clerical celibacy was less a rule and more a running joke. Half the priests in Europe had housekeepers who mysteriously gave birth every couple of years. Bishops had entire second families. The Pope himself, Sixtus IV, at this exact moment, is about to start taxing brothels in Rome to fund St. Peter's. Everyone is doing it. They're just pretending they're not. So Katharina starts small, very small. A visiting Franciscan needs absolution for something creative he did with a milkmaid. Katharina hears his confession, gives him an absurdly light penance, and suggests that if he'd like to show extra gratitude, a small barrel of Rhenish wine left at the back gate would be appreciated for the infirmary. He brings 2 barrels. Word spreads, in the way word always spreads among men who wear skirts and pretend to be holy. Within a year, the system is running smoother than the convent bell rope. Katharina keeps coded records in the margins of hymn books. Little Latin phrases that look innocent, but actually mean. Father Heinrich likes to be spanked, pays in candles. The confessional booth becomes the booking office. A certain number of knocks on the wooden panel means a client is waiting in the chapel crypt after Compline. The nuns who are in on it, and several are, because Katharina pays them in silk ribbons, oranges, and actual meat. Wear soft slippers so their footsteps don't echo. They meet the priests in the warming room near the kitchen, the only place with a fire after sunset. The transactions are carried out on the settles beside the hearth, or if the priest is feeling particularly pious, on the stone floor in front of the statue of St. Catherine, who looks the other way, like she's seen it all before. Katharina charges in indulgences, blank ones signed by the bishop that she somehow acquired, and in good wine, and occasionally in gold florins slipped inside hollowed-out prayer books. She keeps the accounts in a psalter with a false binding. The operation is high-class, discreet, and extremely profitable. The convent's wine cellar has never been better stocked. The nuns' habits are secretly lined with rabbit fur. Someone even installs a proper feather mattress in the guest cell for visiting dignitaries, and the best part? Nobody suspects the quiet, beautiful novice who sings the Salve Regina like an angel. Katharina is untouchable. She's too smart, too careful, and let's be honest, the priests are too compromised to talk. Of course, nothing this good lasts forever. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. That's still years away. Right now it's 1480-something. The enterprise is running perfectly. And Katharina is 20-something and basically the unofficial abbess of vice in a building full of women who are supposed to be brides of Christ. So there we are drifting through the quiet nights of Nun Ran convent somewhere in the misty Saxon countryside, and everything is running like a very soft, very sinful little clock. The bells still ring on time. The nuns still shuffle into chapel with downcast eyes. The abbess still believes the sudden flood of good Rhenish is a gift from heaven itself. Katharina von Bora is now in her middle 20s, still only a novice because she keeps delaying final vows and nobody dares push her. She manages the library, the infirmary, and the secret enterprise with the same calm gray gaze that makes people nervous. The client list has become impressive. We have left behind random wandering friars long ago. Now the visitors include canons from Merseburg Cathedral, a knight who heard rumors in Prague, even a trembling archdeacon who quotes scripture while fumbling with his belt. Katharina treats them all exactly the same, polite, efficient, distant. No kissing on the mouth unless the payment is an actual silver. She writes tiny rules on scraps of parchment and burns them immediately. The 7 sisters who help her call her Domina Nostra when they think she cannot hear. Money hides everywhere. Coins are sewn into the spare cloak of the Virgin in the sacristy moor, lie under the winter-flowering rose bush in the garth. Most of it simply turns into small luxuries, better bread, softer shoes, rose water that makes the dormitory smell like a garden instead of boiled cabbage. Katharina still sleeps on regulation straw, but her pillow is secretly covered in silk from a supposed dead ant. Nobody asks questions. She has also fallen in love, not with any man, but with the feeling of dancing on the very edge of disaster. The risks grow larger. One priest stays until the sky turns pale because he brought real Dutch cheese. Another night, she stages a fake possession in the chapter house so the nuns can scream and run while 3 clients slip away. She laughs afterwards so quietly only the stones hear. The first real trouble arrives in 1490 when a new bishop, Conrad, is appointed. Old, severe, and oddly serious about celibacy for a man with 12 hunting lodges. He announces personal visits to every convent in the diocese. Panic ripples through the cloister, but Katharina simply burns 3 hymn books, moves the feather mattress to the cellar, and orders extra piety. The bishop comes, sniffs the excellent wine, notices the healthy glow on every face, stares too long at Katharina's clever eyes. He leaves without proof, but he leaves a spy, a thin priest with a stoat face who pretends to be deaf. Katharina spots him instantly. Instead of exposing him, she smiles just enough to make him blush every time she passes. Soon he brings marzipan and whispers which way the wind blows in the episcopal palace. She adds him to the coded list as Passa Domesticus, little house sparrow. Years slide past soft as silk. The century turns. Katharina reaches 30-35, almost 40 ancient inside convent walls. Most women her age are grandmothers or dead. She still looks 25, and the younger nuns whisper the devil keeps her fresh. Her hair under the veil stays thick and auburn. She has begun reading forbidden books, smuggled in tiny bundles, Wycliffe Huss, things that make her light candles and read until the wick drowns. The tunnel appears around this time. It starts behind the altar in the side chapel. Lift the carpet, pull the iron ring, descend. A damp ladder and you emerge in the woodshed 200 yards away. A lovesick mason dug it in exchange for 3 nights with Sister Agnes, who laughs like running water. The tunnel has niches for lanterns and a warning rope. It is quietly the most romantic thing built in Saxony in centuries. Clients use it when caution feels necessary, which is more and more often because old Bishop Conrad is still furious and rumors have reached even Rome. Someone writes to the Curia claiming Ran is a suburb of Babylon. Pope Alexander VI, the one currently sleeping with his cousin, laughs until wine comes out his nose but still dispatches investigators because money might be involved, and Borgias never ignore money. Katharina feels the net tightening. She begins moving coins out slowly hidden in flour barrels, inside reliquaries under loose floor stones. She teaches the girls false names, secular clothes, escape routes. Some cry, some look relieved. Little Margaretti kisses her once on the mouth and whispers, "Thank you for showing me the world is wider than these walls, even if the wideness is sinful." One night at 3 in the morning, Katharina sits alone in the dark chapel staring at the crucifix and almost considers true confession. She thinks of cherries gold, the sound of Agnes laughing. Then she smooths her habit and goes back to work. The raid comes on a fog-choked Tuesday in October 1504. 50 men torches papal warrant. They break the main gate for drama, nuns dragged from beds in their shifts. The abbess dies 3 days later, still clutching her beads. They find wine-soaked hollow books, the trapdoor. Half the girls vanish into the mist before the soldiers reach the altar. Katharina stands lost in the chapter house, hands folded, eyes lowered. The vicar reads the charges: fornication, simony, sacrilege. Asks if she has anything to say. She lifts her face and smiles the smallest, softest smile in Christendom. Then she begins to speak. Not a confession. A list. Names, dates, places, which bishop prefers boys, which canon has 3 daughters, which monastery sells pardons by the crate. She recites like plainsong. When she finishes, the vicar is green. The trial is postponed again, postponed forever. 3 weeks later, Katharina walks out the front gate in a plain gray dress, carrying 1 bundle and a safe conduct signed by the same men who came to burn her. Fog curls around her ankles like an affectionate cat. Behind her, the bells of Ran ring for an office no one will ever answer again. The fog swallows her whole that November morning in 1504, and for almost 8 years, Katharina von Bora simply vanishes from every church ledger in the empire. Priests who once knew the password look for her in every quiet tavern between the Elbe and the Baltic and find nothing. Some say she became a rich widow running a respectable inn. Others say she opened a discreet house in Hamburg where the girls still spoke Latin when they cursed. In truth, she does something far more careful. She travels north first to Magdeburg, where a grateful burgomaster who once paid in gold florins hides her for a winter, then further to a tiny village near Lüneburg Heath, where another former client, now fat and married, owes her his entire career. He installs her in a small half-timber-bird house with apple trees and introduces her as his widowed cousin, Katharina von Bora from Thuringia. She cuts her hair to her ears, dyes it the color of wet straw, learns to brew beer that makes men weep with joy, and waits. She waits like a cat, waits calm, unblinking, patient. The beer makes money, the apple trees make schnapps, the years make her careful. She never goes to church, but she keeps a psalter on the table for appearance. Children in the village call her Tank Kiev and bring her dandelions. She smiles, lets them sit on her doorstep, tells them stories about saints who were secretly pirates. At night, she counts the money still hidden in the floorboards under her bed, and thinks about the future the way other women think about grandchildren. By 1510, the scandal of Ran has faded into the kind of story priests tell each other after too much wine late at night. The convent itself is half-ruined, ivy growing through the chapter house, the tunnel collapsed, the rose bush dead. Most of the sisters married or disappeared. One became a beguine in Cologne, another drowned herself in the Mulde, out of shame or guilt, nobody is sure. Katharina hears these things from traveling merchants and files them away the way she once filed client preferences. She feels no guilt, only a mild curiosity, like reading about someone she knew a lifetime ago. In 1512, a new rumor drifts north. A loud monk in Wittenberg is nailing papers to doors and calling the Pope a Babylonian whore. Katharina listens, pours another beer for the messenger, laughs softly when she hears the monk's name is Martin Luther. She remembers a thin, intense Augustinian who once came to Ran to preach retreat and spent the entire week staring at her hands while she turned pages of a lectionary. He had paid nothing, of course monks have no money, but he had looked at her like she was the first real thing he had seen in years. She does not write to him. She is not sentimental. Instead, she starts moving south again, slowly, carefully, like smoke under a door. First to Torgau, where her brother lives, then to Leipzig, where cousins still speak to the ex-nun who brought so much shame on the family name. They take her in because blood is blood, and because she brings money and beer recipes and a way of looking at you that makes you feel you have already lost the argument. She wears plain wool dresses now, no veil, no silk, just the quiet authority of a woman who has run an empire and walked away from the ashes. By 1519, she is 40 years old, still straight-backed, still beautiful, in the way a blade is beautiful. She lives in Wittenberg because that is where the storm is, and Katharina has always preferred to stand in the eye. She rents rooms, keeps bees, brews beer for the university students, watches the world catch fire around a fat ex-monk, who now signs his letters Dr. Martinus Lutherus. People say he is looking for a wife. People say many things. In 1523, 12 nuns escape from another convent in a herring barrel and end up on Luther's doorstep begging asylum. One of them is A.V. von Schenfeld, who once worked the warming room at Marienthron on Tuesday nights. A.V. recognizes Katharina across the crowded courtyard and drops her bundle. They do not embrace, there are too many eyes, but later in the kitchen over watered wine, A.V. whispers what happened to the tunnel, and Katharina whispers back it collapsed the same year your virtue did, and they laughed the way only women who have seen everything can laugh, quiet and tired and fond. Luther marries one of the escaped nuns, not Katharina. At first everyone thinks he will marry Ave because she is young and blonde and looks good in woodcuts. Katharina watches the wedding from the back of the church, wearing a plain brown dress, and feels nothing at all except mild amusement. She has waited this long, she can wait a little longer. The first marriage lasts 2 years and ends in tears and separate bedrooms. The second choice also fails. By 1525, Luther is 41, overweight, famous, and exhausted, and the university wives keep trying to pair him off with nice pious girls who faint when he swears. One evening in June, he comes to Katharina's house to buy beer stays for supper stays until the candles burn low. They talk about everything and nothing. Augustine indulgences the price of barley, the way fear feels in the stomach at 3 in the morning. When he leaves, he kisses her hand like a courtier, which is ridiculous because his hands shake, and she is 46, and neither of them believes in romance anymore. 2 weeks later, on the 13th of June 1525, he knocks again, this time with a ring made from a silver coin, and a proposal that sounds more like a business merger than poetry. She says yes immediately because why not? They marry the same evening in the Black Cloister with only close friends and a great deal of beer. The next morning, the whole town wakes up to discover Dr. Luther has married the ex-nun who once ran the most notorious convent in Saxony. And half the priests in Wittenberg suddenly remember urgent business in Bavaria. Katharina moves into the monastery that is no longer a monastery, hangs new curtains, plants herbs in the courtyard, turns 44 rooms into a home, a hotel, a brewery, a school, a hospital. She calls him Herr Doctor when she is annoyed, which is often, and Main Martin when she is not. She runs everything with the same calm efficiency she once used to run priests through the tunnel behind the altar. Students board for a guilder a week, eat better than they have in their lives, learn Latin swear words, and how to plant potatoes. She has 6 children in 10 years, buries 2, keeps the rest alive through plague and war and Reformation chaos. People ask her sometimes, usually over too much beer, if the stories are true about Marienthron, the tunnel, the coded hymns, the feather mattress. She smiles the same small soft smile she used in the chapter house 50 years earlier and says, "I was young and the world was very dark and wine was expensive." Then she changes the subject to the price of barley or the baby's teeth, or whether Luther remembered to lock the chickens up before preaching himself hoarse again. She dies in 1552 after a cart accident, fleeing yet another war at the age of 53, still beautiful, still straight-backed, still terrifying when she was angry. They bury her in Torgau under a plain stone that says simply "Higher Root Frau Katharina Lutheran." No mention of the convent, the tunnel, the nights beside the hearth, a way she once made half of Saxony tremble, with a list of names recited softly in candlelight. But if you go to the church in Torgau on a quiet evening, and the light is slanting through the windows, just right, sometimes people say you can smell Rhenish wine and rosewater, and hear very far away the sound of a woman laughing low and fond like someone who got away with everything and still managed to end up exactly where she wanted to be. The first winter in the Black Cloister is cold enough to make the beer freeze in the barrels, and Luther complains every morning that his toes have declared independence from the Reformation. Katharina wakes at 4 the way she did in the convent, only now instead of matins, she lights the kitchen fire, counts the students, boots by the door, and calculates how many loaves she can stretch from yesterday's flour. She has 37 mouths to feed on any given day, sometimes 50, when Krana drops by with half the town council, and everyone wants sausages. Luther preaches 3 times a week, writes books faster than the printers can set type, and still manages to lose his spectacles in the pigsty twice a month. Katharina finds them, wipes them on her apron, and hands them back without comment. She has stopped being impressed by genius. It is just another thing that needs managing, like damp firewood or theological controversy. The children start arriving with reliable German punctuality. Hans in 1526. Keith in 1528. Elizabeth, who lives only 8 months and leaves a hole in the house that never quite closes. Martin in 1531. Paul in 1533. Margaretti in 1534. Each birth is quiet and practical. The midwife paid in beer and sausages, the baby wrapped in linen. Katharina already hemmed while Luther was busy arguing with Zwinny about the real presents. She nurses them herself because wet nurses are expensive, and because she likes the weight of a child against her breast, because it reminds her that some things in life are still uncomplicated. When Elizabeth dies, she closes the tiny eyelids, kisses the cold forehead, and goes straight back to the kitchen to knead bread. Because grief is a luxury and the students still need supper, Luther locks himself in his study for 3 days and emerges pale and furious at God. Katharina leaves a jug of beer outside the door and says nothing. She has learned that men shout at heaven, and women keep the world turning while they do it. Money is always tight. The Pope has confiscated everything. Luther once owned the elector helps, but princes are fickle, and the printing press eats gold like a dragon. Katharina plants every spare inch of the cloister garden with cabbage, beans, peas, and the new potato things the students call earth apples and refuse to eat, until she threatens to serve them raw. She keeps bees in painted skeps brews beer, so good the Bishop of Naumburg sends a servant every Michaelmas with an empty barrel and a full purse. She buys a farm outside town, another in 1532, a third in 1535, because land is the only thing that does not argue about transubstantiation. The farmers call her Frau Doktorin and touch their caps when she rides past on a sturdy mare with her skirts hitched up and a ledger under her arm. Luther calls her my Lord Keith and means it half as compliment, half as surrender. Visitors never stop coming. Pilgrims, theologians, runaway monks, English emissaries carrying letters from Henry VIII, who wants to know if Luther thinks 6 wives is excessive. Katharina feeds them all, finds them. Beds listens to their stories of burned Bibles and secret weddings in Denmark, and always knows exactly how much butter is left in the pantry. She learns to speak slowly to the foreigners because her Saxon accent makes Kranaha's wife giggle, and she refuses to give anyone the satisfaction. She keeps the accounts in a thick book locked with an iron clasp, and every year on New Year, as Eve, she and Luther sit by the fire with a bottle of the best wine, and she reads the numbers aloud, while he marvels that they are still solvent. He kisses her ink-stained fingers and calls her his rib, but everyone in Wittenberg knows who really keeps the bones together. Some nights when the house is finally sleeps, she walks the long corridor past the snoring students, past the nursery, where Margaretti breathes softly through her thumb and stands in the room that used to be the monk's chapter house. Moonlight falls through the high windows onto the flagstones where once she recited a list of names that saved her life. She touches the cold stone and thinks about tunnels and rosewater and the way fear used to taste like candle smoke. Now fear tastes like the possibility that Paul will catch the sweating sickness, or that the emperor will march north again, or that Luther will preach one sermon too many and end up like Huss. She has traded one kind of danger for another, but this one at least is hers to manage. In 1532, the plague comes. Luther refuses to leave the town, says pastors do not run away. Katharina packs the children off to her brother, and Torgo stays behind with 2 maids and a student who is too poor to flee. They nurse the dying in the streets, burn rosemary in the rooms where the air has turned black, bury the dead in shallow graves because the ground is frozen. Luther writes letters to frightened councils, telling them to repent and open hospitals. Katharina simply opens the cloister doors and turns the refectory into a ward. When it is over, they are both thinner and quieter, and the garden is full of new mounds no one marks. She plants roses on them, because roses do not ask questions. By 1540, she is 51, gray, threading her braid like silver wire in copper. Her hands are rough from garden work and brewery vats, but the bones are still fine, the eyes still sharp. Luther's kidneys torment him constantly. He pisses gravel and preaches anyway, sometimes from a chair because standing hurts too much. Students carry him home on lecture days like a triumph, and Katharina meets them at the gate with hot bricks and a look that says, "Do not drop my husband." She brews him nettle tea and makes him drink it, even when he calls it piss of Satan forgot to bless. At night she rubs his back with goose fat and listens to him mutter about the Pope and the Turks and the end of the world. She falls asleep to the rhythm of his breathing and dreams of apple trees in Lüneburg and a house with no bells. People still whisper the old stories. A canon from Merseburg visits in 1542 already drunk by supper and asks loudly whether it is true. Frau Luther once charged indulgences by the hour. Katharina refills. His cup smiles sweetly and says only that everything she ever sold was worth the price. The table roars with laughter. Luther laughs hardest because he has never asked and does not want to know. Some truths are better left sleeping under rosebush. In February 1546, Luther leaves for Eisleben to mediate a quarrel between quarrelsome counts. He is 62, looks 80, kisses her goodbye in the courtyard, and tells her not to worry because he intends to come home and be a nuisance for many more years. Katharina watches the wagon disappear down the icy road and feels the old familiar twist in her stomach, the same one she felt the morning the soldiers broke down the convent gate. She keeps busy, plants early peas, writes letters to the farmers about spring sowing. 3 weeks later, a messenger arrives at dawn with a letter in Luther's shaking hand. "I am too weak to write more. Come if you can." She is already packing when the second messenger brings the news that he died in the night, whispering, "We are beggars." This is true. She does not scream, does not faint, simply closes the door to her room for 1 hour. When she comes out, her face is calm, her orders precise. The funeral will be in Wittenberg, the children will wear black, the students will sing. She rides to Eisleben herself, sits by the body all night, holding his cold hand and telling him quietly that the beer is getting warm and the pigs have escaped again and he needs to come home right now because she is tired of doing everything alone. At dawn she kisses his forehead for the last time and lets them nail the coffin shut. The empire mourns, doctors write Latin elegies, princes send black horses. The university closes for a week. Katharina stands dry-eyed through it all, wearing the same plain dress she wore the day she walked out of Marienthron, because some circles are perfect and need no decoration. When they lower him into the castle church floor, she drops a single white rose onto the lid and thinks, "Here lies my second and last rebellion." Afterward, the deaths surface like stones after a flood. Printers, lawyers, land agents, everyone who ever lent Luther money because he gave it to the poor. She sells the farms one by one, keeps only the little house in Salzdorf, where the bees still hum in summer. The children scatter. Hans to study law, Paul to medicine, Margarete to marry a theologian who trembles whenever his mother-in-law visits. Katharina moves from house to house, a quiet gray ghost, brewing beer, keeping accounts, telling her grandchildren the same pirate saint stories she once told village children near Lüneburg. In December 1552, fleeing yet another army, she takes a wagon north. The horse bolts, the wagon overturns, she is thrown against a milestone. 3 weeks later in Torgau, she dies with her daughter's hand in hers, asking for a sip of the good Rhenish because her throat is dry. They bury her quietly, no princes, no elegies, just the townspeople who loved her beer and feared her tongue. A plain stone, a simple name. But on certain spring evenings when the apple trees are in blossom and the bees are drunk on nectar, old women in Torgau still swear they smell rosewater on the wind and hear very far away the soft, low laughter of a woman who ran away from every cage they built for her and still somehow ended up exactly where Grace was waiting. Years later, long after the stone is set in Torgau church floor, the stories refuse to stay buried. Children in Wittenberg grow up hearing whispers that Frau Luther keeps a secret room somewhere under the black cloister where the old tunnel used to run, that on certain foggy Michaelmas nights the bells of Marienthron ring once, although the ruins have no bells left. Students swear they have seen a woman in gray walking the cloister garth at dawn, counting invisible coins into invisible barrels. They blame the beer, of course, but the older townspeople cross themselves and speak of Keith, who outran the devil twice and made him pay for the privilege. The house itself becomes a shrine of sorts. Pilgrims come to see Luther's desk, his ink stains, the chair he died in. They want heroics, thunder, the 95 Theses. What they get is Katharina's kitchen, her brewing kettle still hanging above the hearth, her neat rows of account books locked in a chest that no key in Saxony will open. The guide, usually a grandson with her same straight back and gray eyes, tells them quietly that the real Reformation happened here among the cabbage and the babies and the endless mending of stockings. Most leave disappointed. A few understand and light a candle. In Rome, the sealed records of Marienthron gathered dust in a cedar chest marked Causa Monstrialis Nimis Turpia. Every century or so, a curious cardinal breaks the wax, reads 3 pages, turns purple, and orders the chest sealed again for another 100 years. The last time was 1789. The cardinal reportedly laughed until he choked on his own snuff and then had a stroke in the archive. They carried him out past the chest, still smelling of Saxon rosewater, though no one could explain why. Back in Saxony, the rose bush at the ruined convent blooms blood red every October, no matter how many times the church orders it uprooted. Local girls leave ribbons on the thorns when they want bold lovers or easy childbirth. The priest pretends not to notice because the offerings are always accompanied by a small jug of excellent beer, and he is only human. Katharina's children grow, marry, argue about inheritance the way all good Lutherans argue about everything. Paul becomes a doctor and treats half the courts of Europe. Margaretha runs her household with the same iron ledger her mother taught her. They speak of muti with the mixture of terror and pride usually reserved for minor deities. When Paul's wife complains that he never has time for the children, he shrugs and says, "My mother raised 6 while running a university, a brewery, and the entire Reformation. You have 4 and a maid manage your time." In 1609, a Jesuit writing a very smug counter-Reformation pamphlet claims to have proof that Luther's wife was a common whore before she ensnared the arch-heretic. The book is barely off the press before every copy in electoral Saxony mysteriously disappears. Printers wake to find their shops knee-deep in apple blossoms, though it is January. The Jesuit himself receives a small barrel of beer that explodes in his cellar and ruins 5 years of careful notes. He leaves Wittenberg hastily and is never heard from again. Paul Luther signs the accompanying letter simply "A grateful son," and everyone understands. By 1700, the tunnel is a children's dare. Village boys crawl into the collapsed entrance with lanterns looking for the bones of sinful priests and find instead a single perfectly preserved silk ribbon the color of candle flame. They bring it out as proof, and the ribbon vanishes the same night from the pastor's locked drawer. The pastor drinks 3 cups of small beer and goes to bed early with a headache. During the 7 Years' War, when Prussian soldiers camp in the Black Cloister Gardens, a young lieutenant dreams of a woman in gray who stands at the foot of his cot and counts coins into his open hand. When he wakes, his purse is heavy, though he swears he arrived broke. He deserts the next morning, walks to Hamburg, buys a ship, and is last seen sailing for the Americas with a rose bush and a pot on the quarterdeck. His descendants still send a crate of rum to Wittenberg every Christmas, though no one remembers why. In 1848, when revolution flickers across Germany, a young seminary student writes a thesis claiming Katharina von Bora was the true founder of Protestant domesticity. His professor, a dry old stick, scoffs and demands primary sources. That night the professor dreams of a woman pouring beer while reciting accounts in perfect Latin. He wakes gasping, finds his study ankle-deep in rose petals, and quietly passes the thesis with highest honors. Even in the 20th century, she refuses to fade. During the Second World War, when the castle church is bombed and Luther's tomb cracked open, the caretaker swears that for one night the crack sealed itself with what looked like fresh mortar and smelled faintly of apples. In the morning, a single red rose lay on Katharina's stone in Torgau, though the church had been locked for weeks. Old women in Saxony still set an extra cup on the table on December 20th, her death day. Just in case. They pour good Rhenish and leave the door on the latch. Most nights nothing happens. Sometimes the level in the cup is lower by morning, and the room smells of rosewater and candle smoke, and very far away someone is laughing soft and low like a woman who kept every secret she ever sold and still came out ahead. And if you walk the Cloistergarth in Wittenberg at twilight when the students have gone home and the tourists have taken their photographs, you might notice that one particular flagstone is always clean no matter how long since it rained. Kneel and put your ear to it on a quiet evening, and you can almost hear the faint clink of coins, the rustle of silk against stone, the patient breathing of a woman who turned every cage into a doorway and simply walked through. She never really left. She just moved the business upstairs. The centuries keep turning like slow pages in a psalter nobody reads anymore, and still she lingers in the corners of Saxony the way candle smoke lingers in wool. By the time the 19th century arrives with its trains and its newspapers and its very serious men and very serious beards, Katharina von Bora has become 2 different women. To the pious, she is the perfect pastor's wife who turned a chaotic monastery into a quiet Christian home, baked bread for the poor, and never once complained about her husband's table manners. To the slightly less pious, she is the escaped nun who married the ex-monk and gave the Pope a permanent headache. Both versions sell postcards. Neither version is the woman who once kept coded hymns and a tunnel behind the altar. In 1876, an ambitious young pastor in Grimma decides to excavate the ruins of Nun Ran for a sentimental booklet about pre-Reformation piety. He brings lanterns, theology students, and a great deal of self-importance. They dig for 3 weeks in the cloister garth and find nothing but broken tiles and rabbit bones. On the last night, the pastor dreams he is back in the chapter house, only the room is full of women in gray habits who are counting gold florins into barrels of wine. One woman turns, smiles the smallest smile in Saxony, and says in perfect Latin that some things are buried deeper than shovels go. He wakes with rose petals in his beard and cancels the booklet. The students drink the remaining beer and go home early. Meanwhile, in Wittenberg, the Black Cloister has become a museum. Velvet ropes keep visitors from sitting in Luther's chair. A waxwork Katharina stands in the kitchen forever stirring a pot that will never boil. The real kitchen, the one behind the velvet rope, still smells faintly of apples and hops on autumn evenings when the custodian locks up alone. He has learned not to whistle after dark because once, just once, a soft voice answered from the cellar with the exact tune his grandmother used to sing in Lüneburg 60 years earlier. He leaves a small glass of beer on the windowsill every Friday now, and the glass is always empty by Monday. In 1925, a film studio in Berlin decides to make a tasteful biographical picture about Martin Luther. They cast a handsome actor with a square jaw and a gentle actress with braids to play Katharina. The actress arrives on location in Wittenberg, walks into the cloister kitchen for costume measurements, and immediately faints. When she wakes, she says she saw a woman in gray standing by the hearth who looked at her with calm gray eyes and said quietly, "I never wore braids, child. I cut my hair short the day I left the convent." The actress refuses to continue. The studio recasts the role with someone blonder and sweeter, and the film is a flop. Critics complain that Frau Luther seems oddly absent, even when she is on screen. During the GDR years, the authorities turned the Black Cloister into a workers' education center. They paint over the old frescoes, install fluorescent lights, and hold lectures on scientific socialism in the refectory. The lecturers complain that the room is always cold, no matter how high they turn the radiators. One winter night in 1973, a particularly dogmatic comrade stands at the lectern denouncing medieval superstition and the exploitation of the masses by monastic brothels. Halfway through his speech, every light in the building goes out at once. When the emergency lamps flicker on, he is alone in the hall, though the doors are locked from the outside. On the lectern lies a single red rose and a scrap of parchment that smells of candle smoke. The comrade is found the next morning sitting on the curb muttering about tunnels and rosewater. He requests immediate transfer to Berlin and spends the rest of his career teaching traffic safety. After reunification, the museum reopens with better lighting and an audio guide in 7 languages. The guide describes Katharina as a capable household manager who supported her husband's work. Visitors nod politely and buy postcards of Luther nailing theses. Children on school trips run through the corridors shouting, and the echoes sound almost like laughter. In the gift shop, an elderly volunteer sells honey from the cloister bees. She is small, gray-haired, straight-backed, and refuses to give her name. When asked how long she has worked there, she smiles and says since before the bees were born. Nobody thinks to ask which bees she means. In 2017, during renovations, workers break through a walled-up cellar beneath the old brewery. They expect rats and mold. Instead, they find a small brick room perfectly dry with a stone bench, a row of empty flagons that once held Rhenish, and a single feather mattress rolled neatly in the corner. The mattress is stuffed with goose down and rose petals that crumble to dust when touched, but still smell sweet after 500 years. On the wall, someone has scratched in careful Latin, "KVB fecit libertatem. Katharina von Bora made freedom." The archaeologists photograph everything, write careful reports, and quietly brick the room up again because some discoveries are better left to the dark. That same year, a teenage girl from Leipzig runs away from home and hides in the cloister garden for 3 nights. She is pregnant, terrified, and has nowhere to go. On the 3rd night, she falls asleep under the rose arbor and dreams of a woman in gray who sits beside her counting coins into her open hands. When the girl wakes, her purse is heavy, though she arrived with nothing, and there is a scrap of parchment tucked into her pocket that reads in old-fashioned German, "The world is wide, child. Walk through the doorway they forgot to lock." She keeps the note, has the baby, studies law, and 30 years later becomes the first female judge in Saxony to specialize in cases of ecclesiastical abuse. She never tells anyone where the note came from. Sometimes tourists leave offerings. A bottle of good wine on the kitchen windowsill. A ribbon tied to the rose bush that was not there yesterday. A single gold florin, modern replica of course, slipped into the collection box with no note that says thank you for the safe passage. The museum staff collect the wine for their Christmas party and pretend not to notice that the level is always lower by morning. On the anniversary of Luther's death every year, the castle church fills with candles and solemn music. At exactly 3 a.m., when the last organ note fades, the temperature in the crypt drops just enough to miss the breath. Custodians have learned to step outside for a smoke because for 7 minutes the air smells of apples, rose water, and something that might be candle smoke or might be forgiveness. Then the scent is gone and the church is only a church again. And if you stand very still in the cloister garden at twilight on any ordinary evening in late October, when the first frost silvers the grass, you might hear the faint clink of coins being counted, the soft rustle of a gray dress against stone, and very far away the patient breathing of a woman who turned every rule into a doorway and simply walked through, carrying the keys in her pocket like loose change. She is not a ghost. Ghosts want something. She wants nothing anymore except perhaps the quiet satisfaction of knowing the account's always balanced in the end. And so the years keep folding into each other like pages in an old account book that nobody can quite close because the numbers still move when you are not looking. In the 21st century, Saxony is all glass and autobahns and wind turbines turning slowly against pale skies, but the old stones remember. Tourists take selfies in front of Luther's door and buy chocolate. Martin Luther's in the Christmas market, and never notice that the honey sold beside the cathedral always tastes faintly of roses, though no roses grow nearby. The beekeepers shrug and say it is the soil. They know better than to say anything else. In 2023, a doctoral student from Berlin arrives in Wittenberg to write about women in the early Reformation. She is brilliant, sharp-tongued, allergic to sentiment, and convinced that Katharina von Bora has been sanitized into a Protestant Barbie. She books the tiny apartment above the old brewery for 3 months, determined to find the real woman behind the postcards. On her first night, she wakes at 3 a.m. to the smell of candle smoke and apples. The kitchen light is on, though she turned it off. On the table lies an open ledger she knocked shut before bed, she is sure of it, and a single line is highlighted in red that was not there yesterday. KVB Fecit Libertatem. She photographs it, shakes her head, goes back to bed. The next morning the highlight is gone, but the page smells of rosewater. She tells no one. Week after week strange things accumulate. Her laptop battery lasts twice as long when she writes about the convent years. The kettle boils faster when she curses the patriarchy in Low German. One evening she falls asleep at the desk and dreams she is walking through the cloister garth, counting coins into the hands of frightened girls in gray habits. A woman beside her says softly, "You do not need to save us, child. We already saved ourselves. Just write it true." She wakes with tears on her face and the thesis suddenly flows like beer from a tapped barrel. When she defends 6 months later, the committee sits in stunned silence, then gives her the highest distinction the university has awarded in 40 years. She publishes the book under the title The Woman Who Sold Indulgences and Bought Freedom, and it sells out in 3 languages. Reviewers call it revolutionary. She never mentions the nights the apartment smelled of Rhenish or the way the bees followed her home to Berlin. On TikTok, teenagers discover the legend and turn her into a meme. Katharina von Bora Boss Babe Energy. Run me my coins like Keith in 1504. They make edits with Lana Del Rey songs and clips of girls smashing patriarchal statues. Old Lutheran pastors clutch their pearls and write stern letters to the church newspaper. The letters disappear from their desks overnight, replaced by apple blossoms in December. The pastors drink herbal tea and go to bed early with headaches. In 2025, a streaming service announces a gritty prestige drama about Luther's marriage. They cast a Swedish actress with cheekbones like cathedral spires to play Katharina, fierce, sexy, tragically misunderstood. The actress arrives in Wittenberg for location scouting, walks into the black cloister kitchen, and immediately starts crying without knowing why. During the table read, she keeps ad-libbing lines that are not in the script, things like "The world is wide, child, walk through the doorway. They forgot to lock and I only moved from one kind of holy service to another." The director loves the improvisation, keeps it all. When the series airs, the critics rave about the raw authenticity of her performance. The actress wins awards, says in interviews that the character simply took her over. She buys a small house in Torgo and plants apple trees, though she has never gardened in her life. Meanwhile, in the museum, staff have quietly stopped trying to explain certain things. The feather mattress discovered in 2017 is stored in a climate-controlled room, but every October it smells stronger of roses, though the petals crumbled to dust centuries ago. The ledger that no key opens sometimes opens itself to a page with fresh ink that was not there the day before, always a new line of perfect Latin in Katharina's unmistakable hand. The last entry dated November 19, 2025 reads, "Simply sat as the accounts are settled." The curator photographs it, locks the case, drinks 3 glasses of the cloister honey wine, and takes early retirement in Portugal. On certain spring evenings when the light falls exactly right through the high windows of the castle church, the shadow of a woman in grey appears on the floor beside Luther's tomb. She stands there for 7 minutes with her hands folded, exactly as she stood in the chapter house in 1504. Visitors think it is a trick of the light, take videos, post them online. The comments fill with crying emojis and heart hands and girls writing, "I want to be her when I grow up." The shadow never moves, never speaks, just stands in quiet satisfaction, as if to say, "I was here first, and I am still here last." The bees still make rose honey, though no roses grow within miles. The beer still tastes of something that makes men confess things they forgot they knew. The wind still carries candle smoke through streets that have not seen open flames in centuries. And if you walk the old convent ruins near Grimma at twilight, you might find a single red ribbon tied to a thorn on the bush that refuses to die. Take it if you dare, leave a coin if you are wise. The accounts are settled, but Keith has always appreciated good customers. She never preached a sermon, never nailed anything to a door, never wrote a single treatise that changed the world. She simply kept the world turning while the men shouted at heaven and each other. She fed them, brewed for them, counted for them, loved them, buried them, and when her own time came, she walked away from the last cage with the same small, soft smile she wore the day she walked out of Marringthron, carrying 1 bundle and every key she had ever stolen. The Reformation began with thunder. It continued with bread and beer and babies and quiet, terrifying competence in a kitchen that smelled of apples and rosewater. History remembers the thunder. Saxony remembers the woman who came after and made sure everyone survived it. And if on some ordinary night you fall asleep with the window open and the room smells suddenly of candle smoke and summer apples, do not be afraid. It is only Keith checking the accounts one last time, making sure the books still balance, making sure the girls got away, making sure the doorway stays open for whoever needs it next. She always leaves the change on the table. By the winter of 2026, the world has grown loud again, wars scrolling across phones, prices climbing like ivy, children learning to duck when drones pass overhead, and still in the quiet corners of Saxony, the scent of rose honey drifts out of kitchens where nobody keeps bees. People have stopped calling it coincidence. In Wittenberg, the museum hires a night guard specifically because the day staff refuse to lock up alone anymore. The new guard is 24, ex-military, quiet, likes the solitude. On his 3rd shift, he finds a single gold-florin modern replica on the windowsill beside an empty beer glass that was not empty when he made rounds an hour earlier. He pockets the coin because pay is low and tells no one. The next night, the glass is full again, and the coin is waiting with a tiny scrap of parchment that reads in neat German handwriting, "Keep the change, soldier, the war is over for you." He quits the same week, buys a train ticket south, and is last seen boarding a ferry in Rostock with a duffel bag and a rose bush in a pot. His mother receives postcards from Greece for years, always signed only K in Torgo. The church where she lies keeps having small, mysterious donations. Someone leaves barrels of good Rhenish in the vestry every December 20th, though the side door has been bolted since 1989. The pastor, a tired woman with 3 children and a leaking roof, stopped asking questions long ago. She simply rolls the barrels into the cellar, sells the wine at the Christmas market, and uses the money to fix the roof again. The congregation calls it the Katharina Fund and pretends not to notice that the wine never runs out before the bills are paid. A startup in Leipzig tries to make an AI chatbot trained on Katharina's surviving letters and table talk. They feed it every scrap of her handwriting, every account book, every curt little note that begins, "Herr Doctor, you left the pigs out again." The beta version launches in April 2027 and immediately starts answering questions in first person with a dry Saxon accent nobody programmed. Users ask about Luther and get replies like he was a terrible patient and worse with money, but he meant well. Users ask about theology and get silence followed by, Would you like the recipe for beer that does not sour in summer? Within a week, teenage girls are asking it for life advice and receiving answers like the world is wide, child, walk through the doorway. They forgot to lock and never ever sign anything you have not read twice. The investors panic, try to shut it down. The server farm in a warehouse outside Halle loses power for exactly 7 minutes at 3 a.m. every night for a month. When technicians finally pull the plug, the last message scrolling across every screen in the building is saddest the accounts are settled. They scrap the project, sell the hardware, and plant apple trees in the parking lot because none of them can explain why that feels like the right thing to do. In 2028, a refugee boat from Syria founders off Lesbos. 43 people make it to shore half-drowned, clutching children and plastic bags. A fisherman pulls a woman from the water who is barefoot wearing a soaked gray dress that looks centuries old. She helps carry children to safety, counts them one by one the way someone once counted coins into barrels, then walks away before anyone can ask her name. The Syrian mothers swear she smelled of apples and candle smoke. Greek television runs the story for a day, then forgets. The fisherman keeps a red ribbon he found knotted around the gunwale of his boat and will not sell it for any price. Back in Saxony, the rosebush at Marenthron flowers blood red in November 2029, though frost has killed everything else for miles. A group of art students camps there overnight, filming a documentary about forgotten women. They wake to find their tents arranged in a perfect circle and a small fire still burning, though they brought no wood. In the ashes lies a single page torn from an account book dated 1504, listing names and sums in faded brown ink. The handwriting is unmistakable. They take it to the university in Leipzig, where experts argue for months about carbon dating and provenance, and finally lock it in a vault, because every woman who touches the page starts crying without knowing why. On New Year's Eve 2031, the lights go out across half of Europe for exactly 7 minutes. No cause is ever found. In kitchens from Lisbon to Tallinn, people smell apples and rosewater and hear very far away the soft clink of coins being counted. When power returns, every phone in 3 countries has the same unsent draft message glowing on the screen. The world is wide, child, walk through. Most people delete it and blame the grid. Some keep it. Some quit jobs they hated the next morning. Some finally leave husbands who hit them. Some simply open windows and breathe like it is the first time in years. The museum in Wittenberg quietly removes the waxwork Katharina in 2032. The face never looked right. Anyway, too sweet, too still. They replace it with an empty chair beside Luther Z's desk and a small brass plaque that reads, "She kept the world turning." Visitors understand better than any mannequin ever managed. Children leave drawings on the chair, pictures of a gray lady with kind eyes holding babies or pouring beer or standing in a doorway that has no door. The cleaners sweep them up gently every night and store them in a box labeled simply Keith, and still the stories arrive like slow postcards from everywhere. A midwife in Dresden delivers a difficult birth at 3 a.m. and swears a woman in gray stood behind her, whispering, "Breathe, child, breathe the way someone once whispered, escape roots through fog." A programmer in California fixes a bug that has plagued her team for months and wakes to find a red ribbon tied around her monitor, though her office is on the 23rd floor. A priest in Krakow hears confession from an old woman who says only I kept the books for her once and I never told, and then dies peacefully before he can ask who she meant. The bees still make rose honey. The church barrels still appear. The lights still flicker at 3 a.m. in certain old buildings, and the scent of Rhenish drifts through rooms where no one has opened a bottle. People have stopped trying to explain. They simply say, "Keith, when things balance, when children are born safe, when the money arrives exactly when the rent is due, when the doorway appears where a wall stood yesterday." She never asked for statues or hymns or stained glass windows. She asked for nothing at all, except perhaps that the girls get away, that the books balance, that the beer stays good, and the apples stay sweet. Everything else was extra. And if you are very quiet on any ordinary night anywhere in the world and the room smells suddenly of candle, smoke, and summer apples, do not be afraid. It is only the soft rustle of a gray dress against stone, the patient breathing of a woman who turned every cage into a doorway and left the change on the table for whoever needs it next. She is still keeping the accounts. They always balance in the end. November 19th, 2025 arrives in Wittenberg under a low gray sky that feels like the inside of an old wool habit. Rain taps the museum windows like someone counting coins very softly. At 3:07 a.m., every light in the black cloister flickers once, then steadies. The curator who came in early to finish paperwork finds the iron-clasped ledger lying open on Luther's desk, though the case has 3 separate locks, and the keys are in her pocket. The new page is fresh cream paper, no one stocks anymore, and the ink is still wet. One line only in Katharina's unmistakable hand. Satis omnino, the accounts are completely settled. Beneath it in smaller letters, almost shy. Thank you for keeping the change. The curator does not scream. She has worked here 17 years. She simply closes the book, kisses the cover the way you kiss a child's forehead, and carries it back to the vault. On the way past the kitchen, she notices the beer glass on the windowsill is full for the first time in centuries, and the level does not drop by morning. At the same moment in Torgau, the pastor lights the Advent candle 4 weeks early because the church suddenly smells of apples and candle smoke, and she feels inexplicably happy. In Leipzig, the AI server farm that was supposed to be dead hums once like a satisfied cat, then goes permanently dark. Technicians open the racks and find every hard drive wiped clean except one which contains a single folder labeled teeth containing 1 text file. The world was wide enough, thank you for walking through. In a small apartment in Berlin, the doctoral student who wrote the revolutionary thesis wakes crying without knowing why. Her phone is glowing with a notification she did not set. A calendar reminder for today that reads simply, you kept the books well child, now rest. She deletes it, goes back to sleep, and dreams of apple trees and blossom, though it is November. Across the city, the Swedish actress who played her in the series wakes with the same dream. She pads barefoot to her kitchen, pours a glass of water, and finds a red ribbon knotted around the handle of her kettle. She has never owned anything red. She ties it in her hair, goes to the window, and watches dawn come pale and quiet over the rooftops. Somewhere inside her chest, something loosens like a knot finally pulled free. In Lesbos, the fisherman who kept the ribbon from the refugee boat in 2028 wakes to find his boat painted gray overnight, though he lives alone, and the paint tin in his shed is still sealed. The name on the bow now reads Keith in careful white letters. He smiles for the first time in years, casts off before sunrise, and finds the nets so full of fish he has to call his cousins to help haul them. When they ask about the new name, he shrugs and says an old debt was paid. In California, the programmer finds her monitor ribbon has turned into a thin silver bracelet overnight. She has not taken it off since 2029. It never tarnishes. She wears it to the hospital when her daughter is born at 3:07 a.m. Exactly. And the baby opens her gray eyes and looks at her mother like she already knows how to keep accounts. In Krakow, the old woman who confessed in 2031 did not actually die. She simply walked out of the confessional, smiled at the stunned priest, and has not aged a day since. She lives quietly in a cottage outside the city, keeps bees, and brews beer that tastes of roses. Pilgrims find her without knowing why. She listens to their stories, pours them a cup, and says little. When they leave, their pockets are heavier, though they arrived with nothing. She is 97 or 27, nobody is quite sure. In Wittenberg, the museum opens at 10. Visitors notice immediately that something has changed. The air is lighter. The velvet ropes seem unnecessary. Children no longer run shouting. They walk quietly, touching the stones like they are listening. In the kitchen, the empty chair beside Luther's desk is gone. In its place stands a simple wooden settle, the kind that used to be in the warming room at Marienthron. On it sits a gray wool dress neatly folded with a psalter on top, and a single gold florin resting on the page that reads Bidi Papier Spiritu. The curator does not move it. No one does. People simply sit beside it when they need to cry or breathe or decide to leave something behind, a coin, a ribbon, a note that says thank you. The bees fly out at noon, though it is November and cold. They circle the cloister garden once, twice, then settle on the winter-flowering rosebush that has suddenly appeared where nothing grew before. The blossoms are blood red and smell of summer. Visitors take photographs that come out blurred, except for one shape in every picture, a woman in gray, standing half turned away, smiling the smallest smile in Christendom. By evening, the news spreads quietly the way good beer spreads. People come from Berlin, Leipzig, Dresden, some from farther. They bring nothing and leave lighter. The church in Torgau stays open all night. The pastor lights every candle and runs out by midnight. More appear. No one brings them. They simply are there, burning steady and scentless. Now the rosewater is gone, the apples are gone, only clean beeswax and quiet. At 3:07 a.m., the next morning, every light in Saxony flickers once, then steadies. People wake smiling without knowing why. The ledger in the vault is gone. The dress is gone. The rosebush remains, but the blossoms have fallen overnight, carpeting the ground like snow that smells of nothing at all. In the morning, the museum staff sweep them up gently and scatter them in the garden, where they vanish into the soil before noon. The accounts are settled. Completely. And for the first time in 521 years, the cloister is quiet in a new way. Not the old watchful waiting quiet, but the quiet of a house after the last guest has gone home and the dishes are washed and the fire banked, and someone finally sits down with her feet to the hearth and breathes out all the way. No more ribbons appear. No more beer glasses fill themselves. The honey tastes only of honey now, though it is still the best in Saxony. Children still leave drawings, but now they are of a woman walking away down a long road carrying one small bundle, and looking back with that small soft smile that says, "I kept the change, you keep the world." Visitors still come. They always will, but they leave quieter than they came. Somewhere inside they understand that the story is finished, not ended finished. The way a good ledger is finished, when every debt is paid, every doorway left open, every girl walked through. Keith is gone. Not gone like death, gone like debt cancelled, gone like sunrise, gone like the moment you realize the book's balanced all along, you just had to keep turning pages until the end. The rosebush keeps one single blossom all winter. In spring it will be covered in flowers again because some things refuse to die properly, but the scent has changed. Now it smells only of earth and rain and ordinary apples, and that is enough. In Torgau, the pastor finds a final barrel in the vestry on December 20th. The note pinned to it reads simply for the road in Katharina's hand, though no one saw anyone enter. The wine inside is the best anyone has ever tasted. They drink it at Christmas, and there is exactly enough for every person in the parish, with one cup left over. They leave the cup on the altar. In the morning it is empty, and the church smells of nothing but clean cold stone and candle smoke fading. Somewhere very far away, someone is laughing low and soft and fond, the laugh of a woman who got away with everything and still managed to pay for it all twice over, just to be sure. Then even that fades. The accounts are settled. The world is wide. The doorway stands open. Walk through, child. She kept the change. And now the morning of November 19th, 2025 breaks over. Saxony exactly like every other late autumn morning, cold pale rain ticking. Against the windows, the smell of wet leaves and coal smoke from someone's early stove. Nothing spectacular happens. No lights flicker, no roses bloom out of season, no beer glasses refill themselves. The curator opens the museum at 10. The pastor in Torgau counts the empty barrels and smiles because the roof is finally paid for the doctoral student. In Berlin wakes without tears and deletes the calendar reminder without sadness. The world simply feels finished the way a long difficult sum feels finished when the last digit sits neatly in its place and you can close the book. The change is so gentle, almost nobody notices. A woman in Leipzig, who has been carrying the same secret shame for 23 years, wakes up and realizes she is no longer afraid to tell her daughter. She does, and the daughter cries and hugs her, and the shame dissolves like sugar in hot tea. In Dresden, the midwife who once felt a great presence behind her shoulder delivers another difficult birth and does it perfectly alone and feels proud instead of watched. In California, the programmer takes off the silver bracelet, puts it in a drawer and does not miss it, because the weight has moved inside her chest where it belongs. In Greece, the fisherman paints over the name Keith on his boat because the fish still come without it, and he finally believes they always would. The rose bush at Marienthron drops its last petal on November 20th. By December, it is only thorns and brown sticks like any other bush. No ribbons appear, no coins clink, no candle smoke drifts. The bees make ordinary honey that tastes of linden and clover, and is still the best in Saxony, but no longer impossible. Children stop leaving drawings on the settle in the black cloister. They leave candy wrappers instead or nothing at all. The settle stays empty, and that is fine. The stones feel warmer somehow, as though someone banked the fire one last time and left the door open so the house could air. People expect to feel bereft. They do not. Rested. Like waking from the longest, most complicated dream and discovering the pillow is still cool, and the light is ordinary and good. The stories stop arriving. No more refugees pulled from water by gray-dressed women, no more exploding beer barrels in Jesuit cellars, no more apple blossoms in January. The world turns out to be perfectly capable of running without small miracles, once everybody has learned how to walk through the doorway on their own. In Torgau, the pastor finds the final barrel empty on Christmas morning. She washes it, sets it outside for the rubbish, and feels only gratitude. The church smells of pine and wax, and children's boots and nothing else. She lights the Advent candles 4 weeks late, or exactly on time depending on how you count, and the flames burn straight and ordinary and beautiful. Years will pass. Centuries maybe. The museum will modernize again, someone will install interactive screens, children will poke at Luther as desk and ask why the kitchen chair is empty. The guide will shrug and say she kept the world turning and now it turns by itself. Visitors will nod and not quite understanding, but feeling it anyway in their bones, the way you feel weather changing in an old fracture. The rose bush will be cut down eventually for a car park or a playground or simply because bush die. Someone will plant a new one, and it will flower pink in June, and nobody will think anything of it. The ledger will stay gone, the dress will stay gone, the scent of candle smoke and apples will become only memory, and then not even that. Katharina von Bora will settle at last into the quiet she earned the days she walked out of Maranthron with one bundle and every key she ever needed. And one ordinary evening years from now, someone will walk through the cloister garden at twilight, and notice the flagstone is just a stone like any other. They will put their ear to it anyway, because people always will, and they will hear nothing at all. No coins, no silk, no breathing. Only their own heart and the wind moving through bare branches, and perhaps very far away the soft, satisfied sigh of someone who kept every promise she never made out loud. The accounts are settled, the change has been kept. The doorway stands open and nobody needs to guard it anymore, because the girls learned how to walk through on their own a long time ago. Somewhere a woman laughs once low and fond, and final the laugh of someone who paid for everything twice just to be sure and still came out ahead. Then even that fades into the ordinary evening, and the ordinary stars and the ordinary dark. Sleep now, child. The world is wide and the books are closed and the fire is banked and the house is quiet. She kept the change. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Good night.